groundbreaking report that we are authoring. Really thrilled to have you and Doconomy and your story be part of this report and be part of this interview. We thank you for your time. We know how busy you are. Many congratulations again on your recent successes, and I'm sure there will be many more. So for those who have had their head in the sand, maybe you can tell us what is Doconomy and why.
Oh, thank you for that intro. I'm Mathias here, one of the founders of Doconomy, and by my side I have Johan, of course. What Doconomy is really an impact tech startup, and
it's behind you on the board, yeah.
It's behind me on the board. Yeah, you can see the whole business plan, but it's secret. So our vision is to provide a sustainable lifestyle for all, and the digital tools needed to go into that. And obviously, financial services industry comes with great frequency as also great efficiencies. So the Doconomy is set up as a testament to those abilities, using them to protect our planet. Our ambition is to drive behavioral change, really, and in sorts incentivize a sustainable lifestyle. We believe that what gets measured gets managed, and working around our methodology around calculating the environmental impact transaction by transaction, we think we can educate the many, provide insights, and also engage them in creating a more sustainable tomorrow.
Amazing. And I'd love to get a sense of how did you both come together? Tell us a story of the how, and what was the catalyst that you thought enough's enough, this needs to happen now?
Mathias and I, we've worked together back and forth for over 20 years, 25 years maybe, I don't know. But so our background is in marketing and advertising. And I think around 10 years ago, I remember that Mathias signed up for an MBA at the Stockholm School of Economics, and I was very inspired by that, and I did the same. So I studied at the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. And honestly, I think studying business, at least for me, that was a very inspiring thing. I mean, we realized that creative ideas could be turned into business models, and that led us to if you add purpose to that, I think that was the starting point actually for Doconomy. It's a combination of creativity, communication, business, and technology with an overarching purpose of addressing climate change.
Thanks, Johan. And you talked about purpose there. It'd be really great to get a sense of how exactly have you designed your products to fulfill your purpose?
Right. So, I mean, like Mathias said, we started off with rethinking or reshaping the credit card altogether. Thinking of the credit card as a carrier for something more responsible that could promote responsible consumption by making consumers more informed about the carbon footprint of their purchases. So that's the starting point. So we measure on transaction level and on category level. So it creates an average that you then can use to understand your carbon footprint. So that's the starting point for a dialogue around impact, right? Now we're venturing into looking at how to calculate on product level, because that's the that's the blind spot or the missing link here. So the ability to compare products is very important. So that's why we created something called the 2030 calculator, which is a online tool for brands to actually perform calculations on product level. So once we have that data, we can merge the two. So we can merge transaction level calculations with product level calculations. And that we think could give any consumer a very, very clear picture of the impact connected to their consumption.
Brilliant. And Mathias, maybe I can aim this at you in terms of your own evolution as a business and the products that you have. I can sense a shift from a card to the API. What underpinned that?
We've always tried to walk our talk. So we have 3 services right now, or 3 products. We have a sandbox environment in a mobile banking app connected to a credit card in the Swedish market called Do, which we use to learn from and to extract insights from and understanding better how to engage and activate users. But the same methodology, the all-on-index solution that we're using to calculate impact in our own service in the local market, we're providing to any bank who also want to address this challenge that we're facing in regard to the climate crisis, and we offer that as an API. That's a very important point, I think, also that collaboration has always been at core at what we do, and it's critical when you're trying to drive value-based banking, establishing new markets. We're shaping a category that just didn't exist 3 years ago. So we need to collaborate with anyone else wanting to contribute to those efforts and enable them to engage their users in turn. The third service that Johan touched upon is the 2030calculator.com that enables any brand basically to do the same, to provide greater transparency and in turn shape a new kind of loyalty or preference, if you may, by educating users and consumers around their impact, by making every product sort of a textbook for change. Because the side effect of the 2030 calculator calculating the impact on product level is that it can be presented as carbon labeling, or it can be presented in any context like that, shaping pre-purchase decisions. And that's also a way of us to stepping up to responsibility. And our ambition is really to create 2 global standards, one on transaction level and one on product level, because comparability is at core. If you are to use the power of competitive edge, it needs to be readily comparable. That's why the 2030 calculator is such a beautiful tool, because it reduces complexity, reduces cost, and it reduces time for any SME that want to step up to this. And obviously for the all-on-index, calculating on category level, on transactions, I would say that on a good day, I think we have already set the global standard, launching with Mastercard just the other week, enabling together with Mastercard any other bank to set these calculations into play. Also this week we just launched with Klarna, reaching 90 million consumers overnight in 17 markets. So I think there is a fair amount of credibility to claiming that we have a global standard in play.
I'm really intrigued about the evolution of what you would consider to be impact for the business, and how has that evolved for you? I mean, it sounds like it started off at the individual level, and the opportunities to do it through collaboration at a more systemic level clearly has become more apparent. So I'd love to get a sense from you both, maybe, of when you started, how did you think impact would be measured in a way that you felt was appropriate to the problem that you're trying to solve, and how has that evolved from when you started?
I think when we started this, we were kind of aware of the limitations and the difficulty of actually accessing enough data to make it relevant for a user to understand their carbon footprint. So, but the thing is, we also had a very good sense of we needed to start somewhere, and if you look at transactions, it's really the best starting point if you want to have a dialogue around consumption, because the credit card is something you use every day. So we saw that as an opportunity now, but it is a starting point. So we now venture into calculations on product level, which is such an important step. Like I said before, we want to get to the point where consumers are able to compare products, because that will also create a way for sustainable production to become a competitive edge, meaning that low impact products will be will justify a higher price and then basically shift consumption habits towards a more sustainable way of living. Yeah. So, but I would say when you think about, you have to look for data. That's the key. If you want to change behavior, you need to measure it. So we had that kind of focus that, let's start with transactions. It's a really good start. It's a way for us to make sure consumers start understanding impact.
Thanks, Johan. Mathias, anything to add to that, or are you?
Well, obviously, I agree to all that Johan said. I think there's a few points that could be stressed, of course. And I think sustainability, when we set out to address this, I was about to say solve the climate crisis, which would have been extremely concise. But I think when we set out to try to contribute to addressing this issue, there's a few things that we reacted quite strongly to. That sustainability at that time, 3 years ago, and to a certain extent still, it's a bit of a blame game. Who's to blame? Is it the producer, or is it the consumer? Is it the individual, or is it the group dressed as a corporate or dressed as a government? And it's like, if we are really serious about sustainability, this blame game thing needs to end, right? We need to open doors to be able to contribute, to be able to engage, to be able to measure, and to be able to reduce. And critical to that are two things. Data, as Johan pointed out, and we don't need to dwell into that because it's obvious that data substantiated behavioral change is much easier to document and to incentivize. But it's also language to a great extent. As in any area of expertise, it's easy for the experts to become a little bit narrow in the way that they define and communicate around things. And I think in recent years, we've seen a lot of activity in the youth space, starting in the Nordics and with a ripple effect across the world, which is amazing to see and brings hope in many, many different perspectives. But we've also seen change in language in the media, calling it for what it is, instead of running the agenda of the big corporates. Potentially, I'm not saying it is that way. That potentially there could be an interest of lobbying connected to fossil fuel industries, but that's just something I've heard, and I have no documentation of that at all. So instead of just pushing that agenda, just calling it what it is. We are facing a tremendous crisis. We need to stop blaming each other. We need to start using data to activate and engage, and we need to be able to communicate amongst everyone around this topic. I think Doconomy contributes to all of those three perspectives. Greatly thanks to Johan and the skill set around the design language and packaging of Doconomy services, because it's second to none in any space. But the market has been used to having sustainability services packaged a little bit, it shouldn't be as comfortable, it shouldn't be as sweet, it should come with a trade-off of sorts. Our design doesn't come with a trade-off. Our user experience doesn't come with a trade-off. We don't think we should. Why should it? I mean, the most important issue, most important topic on this planet should, at least to the human species, should be addressed in the best and most efficient way possible. So I'm not sure that I answered all of your question, but it was at least a decent attempt.
It has, and then some. No, you're most certainly right, and thank you for that. I guess a more fundamental question, which I think everybody thinks about, and I'm thinking about the challenges that a lot of organizations have when it comes to sustainability, this big issue that is very global, like you say, that feels very connected because we're all part of the world, but disconnected because how does my individual action actually make a difference? And I think what you're doing, of course, here is bringing that to life. So a basic question, which I think you've answered, but I want to give the opportunity to answer in a more direct way. How do you make people feel like their actions at the individual level can make a meaningful difference to this global problem? And Johan, I think given your design-centric approach and your background in marketing and comms, I'd love to ask you first and then maybe go to Mathias.
Right. I think that our approach is really about creating awareness to start with, meaning that you have to get people interested in finding out their carbon footprint. And I think Matthias mentioned before that when we started this journey 3 years ago, you either had, politics and emotions running all the arguments around climate change and like Matthias said, the blame game, or you had basically zero response from commercial players. So we figured that okay, let's start something where you would willingly find out your carbon footprint connected to your consumption. Now, whether that's something you will act upon or not, it's not for us to decide. The most important thing is to establish that language of impact, the first kind of awareness of that this is actually something I should be interested in. So we try to design our products to stay away from anything that is connected to the big emotional kind of mess around this, and instead show them a tool that's simple to use so they can start this journey of understanding. Now, looking at what they're supposed to do with that information or what they will change in their lifestyle in terms of reducing their carbon footprint, that's really the second step.
And Matthias, before you answer, can I ask you a follow-up question, which is, I think Johan started alluding to it, which is around what are the challenges that your target audience have in dealing with the current financial system in the way they transact. And I think part of that in this agenda, if I may, is the feeling of guilt, this hyper emotional notion of like, you have to do more, otherwise the world's going to end. And so we don't use straws, for example. I'd love to get a sense from you on the challenges maybe, and then the points about the individual level action.
I think guilt can be a tremendous driver. Just look at me before beach season, and it's just, I think it's just not the way around if you want to achieve sustainable change. You need to engage and show the way in a more positive way. If you're looking at a few drivers that could potentially fuel that statement, would be social media. If many times we refer to responsibility as the new prestige, that is some people that in the good old days thought that an American Express Platinum card was the way to go, today find themselves looking quite silly with the symbol saying, I can consume as much as humanly possible, look at me. And obviously the mindset has changed. So the time for this has come, and what was guilt yesterday is not necessarily guilt today. What is incentive yesterday is not necessarily incentive today. What is responsibility and prestige today was not necessarily the same yesterday. And I think a lot of industries are reshaping their businesses around that, but there is also business models in place that are based on the fact that taking care of the planet was not your first thought waking up in the morning. So I think guilt as a driver is something we really, really want to stay away from. And at times it's been challenging because we assume that everybody understands why what we do is important. And most of the times they do, but sometimes you have to put the problem in center also for those connecting with us for the first time. And putting the problem in center is what has given me and Johan the energy to do this to begin with, to really navigate around the problem. Because when you stay with the problem for a very long time, a few interesting things happen. You get to know everyone else surrounding the problem. So you're shaping strong alliances, which is very important if you're a small, agile fintech from the Nordics wanting to create massive change. And these alliances, something that we've brought with us all through our conversation. And I think what one thread that connects all of these alliances is exactly coming back to the answer to your question. It's not driven by guilt. It's driven by opportunity. It's driven by optimism. It's driven by the notion that something can be done. And that is also one of the reasons for us naming our retail banking service Do. Because the challenge has been that there is a lot of walkers out there, but there's even more talkers. And the challenge is that those walking are not talking and those talking are not walking, and we're trying to change that. So we're trying to put the power of change at the fingertips of the consumer in everyday activities, namely using the credit card.
What is the role of belief systems, for example, faith systems, in furthering the aims of the environment and sustainability? Is that an area that you consider to be important? And how can we do more to bring those two worlds together?
I think that's a super interesting question, and I would love to team up on working on that, because I think those underserved populations need to be, they have been neglected, and they need to be overserved, because they, to a great extent, based on my perception, they have a perspective on respect that translates into sustainability in a very good way, taking care of the planet that we live on, taking care of each other and in the way that we live on this planet. And I think that is a perspective that needs to be activated. We need to see more of these communities step forward and saying, this is not okay, you know, the trajectory is not okay. The narrative that we see the world living by out of increased damage done to the ecosystem, that is not okay. That is not in alignment with what we believe that we should respect. That is not in alignment with the way we believe that we should treat each other. So I think there's a lot to be done there, and there's a lot of energy to unleash in protecting the planet and safeguarding the tomorrow of all of us. So I think that's an extremely interesting question, and leading up to this interview, I also think that it's something that I've been starting to have greater interest in and greater respect for, because we cluster people in different ways, you know, depending on our set of beliefs or the way we consume or where we live or the language we share or don't share. And these clusters can all be used as vehicles for a sustainable tomorrow. If we connect with the rationale of those clusters and enable people to contribute to a more sustainable future, I think we can be in a pretty good shape. Just as an example, not connecting it to belief systems or anything like that, but if you take capitalism, for example, as Hugo Chavez said, if the world was a bank, it would have been saved by now. And I think if we can make it profitable to save the planet, it's probably the most efficient way to do that. If we can take the efficiencies of the financial system to cater for the fragilities of the ecosystem that we live by, I think that's one way to exemplify that. Not necessarily precisely on point, but I think out of an effect perspective, I think it's very relevant.
I completely agree. And I have a few more questions just to end, which is, how are you integrating the values, principles of sustainability across your business beyond just the end product?
Right. So we are currently actually tracking all of our employees' carbon footprint, which is kind of interesting. I think for us, it's all about transparency. Like I said, we stay away from the blame game and aim for awareness. And we think that, you know, in terms of how we ensure that we're aligned towards this greater goal, being very open about impact and being very transparent about it. We're basically we have a monthly tracking of our own individual carbon footprint. And that's part of being very transparent, and that's the way we kind of foster a understanding of how we together can actually change. Yeah,
I think it's as Johan is saying, it's very much in the KPIs, and we are doing the individual footprint visualization for staff. We're also measuring the number of tons CO2 reduced through our partnerships and the reach that they provide. Now we're looking at almost reaching potentially through our partners 270 million users. We're looking at numbers of tons CO2 offsetted through our partnership with the United Nations climate change. We're looking at traditional KPIs, like employee satisfaction or training or of course the financial set, but we're also adding the social perspective to this in regard of gender and number of women on leading positions in the management and also on the board, but also out of an investor perspective, because that's completely underserved. We're also looking at other things that are easy to do, like waste and energy consumption. So I think we're navigating by a different set of KPIs. And that is the way we live by our ethos, not just walking the walk, but also talking the talk. We need to manage. And in order to that, we need to measure. So it all comes back to doing what you say that you're doing.
It's incredibly inspiring to hear, especially when you do it end to end. And so my last question is a question that we've asked all of our participants in this Project Inclusion interview process, which is, how do you, especially on a topic like sustainability and climate change, how do you go out of your way to listen to your audience and to your consumers and to your customers on a regular basis?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I think there is a few different ways. The first way to do that on a regular basis is actually selling. And that might not make sense at first, but the way we sell is also to educate, because a lot of the people that we come across interested in our services, especially on bank or brands level, there's a few people in the organization that are the lighthouses showing the way for the rest, but they also use us to a great extent to educate their own organization around this. And in those conversations around educating to engage and to show the way forward, we get a lot of great feedback. Fantastic feedback on, what people are afraid of, what people would like to see happen, and some prejudice also around, this should really be sorted out by the big corporates, or this should really be sorted out by the governments. But what they tend to forget is that there's one thing that needs to change in order to mitigate this crisis, and it is me. I need to change my behavior. Because if I change my behavior and you change your behavior and Johan changes his behavior, all of a sudden we've had a company changing their behavior, because companies are constituted by people. So are governments. And if we can influence individuals and if we can inspire individuals, then I think that's the way we can do that best. And for that to happen, we need to learn what they are afraid of and what they hope for. And that we do in these conversations, 3 to 4 of them every day across the world, from every country in the world, basically. And it's very inspiring and sometimes a little bit scary too.
I mean, we're talking a lot with commercial brands, since we launched a calculator to help them calculate on product level, and it's such a tremendous response on this. So talking about carbon labeling and transparency around the impact, and also transparency, traceability, this is very interesting, because that's also a type of dialogue that is very inspiring. We talk to a lot of new brands that are willing to put out products that have a more sustainable production and a lower impact, to challenge the bigger brands, and this is a very interesting development. So there's a lot of things going on, and both consumers and producers are really indicating that they're ready for this big shift to happen.
Johan,
Mathias, I mean, anything to add, Mathias? Sorry, one last.
Yes. Sorry, I just think with Johan saying that, I think it's, and coming back to your question on underserved, I think the consumers on individual level today wanting to be part of positive change, being part of the solution rather than the problem, are extremely underserved. the only thing more so is that they are extremely underestimated. By voting with our wallet, change will come faster than slower, sooner than later. And I think that is something that we aim to facilitate. But in order to do so in a very good way, we need to educate. Once you're educated, you can have the insights. When you have the insights, you can act on it. And we're there for them every step of the way.
It's a very, very powerful theory of change, and clearly working. Mathias, Johan, genuine pleasure to hear the story of Doconomy and the successes, and thank you, because I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude for finding a solution that is helping all of us and our future generations. And thank you for taking part in this EPA Project Inclusion reports, and we look forward to seeing how the company grows more and more.